doing the bonus session for Leverage, and we're going through the backstage passes. Anybody that doesn't sign up for the backstage passes, it's like, man, hello, do that. Lou, anything else you want to share before you take off?
No, I enjoyed it. I'm going to stick around for just a little bit, but I may just drop off here. So
okay, yeah, no worries.
A little bit out of time, but I'll stick around for a couple of questions.
Yeah, just for everyone to know, it's a half an hour a week until for the backstage passes. Once we get into the 7-week course, it's going to be an hour. So it'll be a half an hour of Tom, Peter, and I presenting a lesson, and then it'll be a half an hour of Q&A. And so you want to leverage those things like your passions, because your passions is where you can make a lot of money. So you want to be selected as one of the live participants in the 7-week course, because the 7-week course is going all over the world, and so you got to ask great questions, be funny, interesting, whatever it is. You want to be able to do that. All right. Ski, what would you like to accomplish today? Questions you have?
I guess my question is not really a question. It's actually a statement about what I've been thinking about leverage relative to what I think people know in physics about leverage and how they match up very well. So the idea of trying to move a big rock by using a fulcrum and a lever, the rock is the big challenge or problem or whatever you're trying to accomplish. And the things that the people and things that we use to do that are the fulcrum and the lever. Am I using that analogy? Is that effective?
I believe so.
As I try to explain this to others? Mm-hmm.
In the book Good to Great by Jim Collins on page 182, it says, when I look over the good to great transformation, the one word that keeps coming to mind is consistency. Another word offered to me by physics professor R.J. Peterson is coherence. What is 1 plus 1, he asked, and then paused for effect. 4. In physics, we've been talking about the idea of coherence, the magnifying effect of one factor upon another. In reading about the flywheel, I couldn't help but think about the principle of coherence. However you phrase it, the basic idea is the same. Each piece of the system reinforces the other parts of the system to form an integrated whole that is much more powerful than the sum of the parts. It is only through consistency over time, through multiple generations, that you get maximum results. So that is...
That's...
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, I was going to say that's where I was going next, actually. As I start to speak to people about leverage, the first thing was to use a good analogy that people can pick up on quickly. But the other thing is, it's also like working out, it's like using your brain and how to be more effective using your mind in general. But more specifically, with leverage, it's like a muscle. And I want to learn to be able to see it and create the leverage more quickly. And I think that's just from practice. That's just from constantly using it, like I said, like a muscle. Going to the gym, you don't go to the gym and work out on a regular basis, you're not going to develop the muscle. Well, if you don't use, try to identify and use leverage as much as you can, you're not going to develop that skill set.
Cool. Peter, that's something that resonated with you on your action vision plan, and in the coaching, where you are a man on a mission, very intentionally looking for how to increase the speed upon which you do things. Thoughts?
Yeah, look at this clear as having a goal, right? A purpose, a goal. For me, it's that simple, and that's where leverage ties in. If you don't know why you're doing something or an idea about what you want to get out of it, then it's impossible to create leverage.
So you've met a lot of people, Peter, around the world. right?
Yep. Yep.
So it seemed like, and I could be wrong, maybe it's just my ego and me being a narcissist, year of drama this year, but it seems like that you observe something different about me upon the speed at which I do things or think.
That's true.
Tom, any thoughts or questions on that?
Oh, well, I think, you make the Energizer Bunny look like you're standing still in terms of thought. I've never met anybody that thinks as fast as you do on your feet and or pulls some things from memory that are so far back that's unbelievable. So, yeah, it's pretty amazing. I wish I could do it.
You have a gift of bringing stories in. It took me 49 weeks in teaching Box 2, sticky messages, ask a question, tell a story. I remember you saying, Mark, the most valuable thing I bring on to the calls, and I'm like, a lot. And you said, what's the most? And it's like, and you said, it's the stories. Like you have like the Golf Pro story, Tom, like that thing is just amazing. Like you have all these stories that are so deeply relevant, and you share them in such an amazing, succinct way. It's almost like if people aren't paying attention and hanging on every word, every syllable, every nuance of what you're saying, they're like, oh, that's a nice story. They're just like, you don't get it. Like you don't understand it.
Well, I guess life's just one big story, and it's easier for me to explain or demonstrate through experience. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It just means that here's something to think about.
So, my vision for leverage is to have it be a movement. And so, Tom, I've seen you tear up 3 times, I think, in the 10-plus years we've known each other. And one of them was when we were in a car in the early years of Century 21, when one of the broker owners was falling on hard times financially, and all the other broker owners went ahead and came around and helped them out. Tom and Peter, how do you develop that kind of culture?
Well, from my perspective, I think it really really comes from the leader of the organization, and I think it's the job of the leader to really set the vision for whatever task or company that they're operating, and then be able to communicate that vision in such a way that the people who are either partnering with you or going to assist you in it get this belief process. I mean, because from my perspective, if I can get somebody to believe in whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish, I mean, really believe it, internalize it, then all of a sudden their behavior changes. And then when their behavior changes, then they start, their whole outcome changes. And the outcome is what gets you to the goal that you're trying to achieve. At least that's been my experience.
Peter?
Yeah, I used to have a quote from Gandhi under my signature at BMW, which was, be the change you want to see in the world. So whether it's the world or your business or your personal life, that to me just integrates with what Tom just said. If you want to create a movement, it starts with, if you want to create it, it starts with you.
So, have either of you read, or anybody on the call, read The Starfish and the Spider?
I have not.
Peter?
I will.
Yeah.
No, I have not.
Rosanna, did you say you had? Or not?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
The Starfish and the Spider, it's a most intriguing book. And it was referred to me by a gentleman in the military and his wife. And if you cut a spider in half, what do you get? I know this is really
Two halves.
You get two halves. You get a dead spider. If you cut a starfish in half, what do you get?
I guess
More
two halves
starfish.
of a starfish.
You get two starfish actually. It regenerates itself. So it talks about the leaderless society. It's talking about technology and how everything is going into like a leaderless society. And there's how a lot of these big worldwide technology companies really started out as a leaderless society. And so it's interesting. Like, I don't really want to be a leader of people. I don't want followers. I want to build a leader of leaders organization. Like, I want us all to be peers. And I wonder if that's what's, held me back in the past, where it's like people are looking for leaders, and it's like, I don't want to be a leader. I want to be a leader of leaders, and that's a totally different mindset. Questions or thoughts, Peter, Tom, or anybody? So, Jill, what would you like to accomplish today?
I'm just taking everything in right now.
Emily, what would you like to accomplish today?
Yeah, I think I'm just kind of soaking everything in as well.
Elise.
Well, we've talked about this briefly in the past, but I just kind of wanted to bring it around. In terms of CPA firms, how do you view their participation in this course as being able to help them either better manage the firm or use it as a tool to add to build their firm, either onboarding or finding new team members?
So we're working with CPAs all over the country, soon to be all over the world, and that's because of Tom. So if it wasn't for Tom being where he was and speaking truth into my life many years ago, I would not be working with CPAs today. So CPAs are a whole different animal, like a very, very different animal. And so they almost don't want their firms to grow because they're really employees. They really own a job. They don't own a company. And so they associate more, about larger business or more business coming in. They associate it with working more hours. Well, that's what an employee thinks. So they think like, most of them think like employees. They don't think like an owner. They don't realize, no, if you double your sales, if you do it right, you'll go ahead and work less hours. And so it takes somebody like another CPA, or it takes somebody maybe like a Tom or a Peter to somehow get them to realize that their thinking is holding them back dramatically.
Okay.
And so, like, if Tom or Peter were to do a 1 or 2 or 3 minute video, and you were to get that out to the tens of thousands of CPAs, you and Jen, the amount of business opportunities that it would bring for your company, Elise, and for Jen's company, and for all of us. I mean, CPAs are one of the most trusted professionals in the world. they have so much leverage that they don't know how to use. And so,
Right.
You know, it's interesting, Mark, the way you described that, because I'd never really thought about that. So if a CPA is working separately, just as that's them and they're the only ones other than maybe an assistant or secretary or something in the company, it really is more like a job. When do they transition from that to owning a CPA firm where they have multiple people and then start taking on additional services under the accounting or financial services industry?
So in the book, I'm reading 4 books right now. One of them is Scaling Up, and a really interesting book, and he talks about the Valley of Death. And I don't know if I can, yeah, here it is. So in America, there's 28 million companies. 96% of those companies are under $1 million. 40% of those companies are between 1 million and 10 million. 0.4% are 10 million, and 17,000 are over 60 million. So it comes into dimensional thinking. It's even with a firm that has 5 employees or 10 employees. Like, I don't know if you remember, Tom, when you went ahead and I was whining, and I think it was about my 7 kids, 4 teenagers, and, 22 employees, and you kind of chuckled, and you said, Mark, be glad you don't have 140,000. And so I was talking to my good friend Dave Libby. I hang out with him because he's more insane than I am. And I shared that with him, and I said, yeah, Tom said this really cool thing. It just stopped me short and said, stop your whining, like, hello. And then Dave said something that was really intriguing, and he said, yeah, but Tom has infrastructure you don't have, Mark, so having 22 employees can be harder than being a president of a worldwide company. I'm like, oh, I never thought of that. And so
I would probably agree with that.
Yeah, I don't think I would. The pressure on for 140,000, like you're leading a company, and you're like, I mean, if I blow out at 22, that impacts 22 people. But if I blow out at 140, I can't even imagine the pressure that's on somebody leading, a worldwide organization. It's just got to be like unbearable. And so,
well, it's harder to change. That's for sure. And the decision to disrupt that infrastructure can either lead to much greater things or lead to disaster. Right? But when it's just going along, it's easier.
Right.
When you're in the status quo, it's easier.
Right. And Tom, go ahead, Tom.
It's I think you come to a point with larger organizations, especially when they're not direct employees, that and maybe it's even harder with employees now I think about it. But you have to lay out the rules or the laws or the path of success, demonstrate why they actually work, and then you have to kind of step back and say, if you're independent, you're going to make the decision to go or not go. And I think that's in your scaling up example, the million that are underneath, they're smaller companies. That's why a lot of them fails, because they keep thinking like an employee or a salesperson or an independent contractor, and stop and never started thinking like an entrepreneur or a business person.
Well, and what you see is, I'll show it on the screen, they call it the Valley of Death. So it's between 1 million and 10 million you die. Between 10 million and 50 million you die. So it's between where all the rules change. So when you go from one dimension, it'll be up in a second here, when you go from one dimension to another dimension, you're in what's called a dimensional gap. And so all the rules, all the rules change. So on the screen you'll see this, like you don't see there's a dimensional gap here that'll destroy you. So rules in dimension M versus dimension and or at, every time we make a dimensional jump, there's new rules. So if you have 5 employees, once you go from 5 employees to 10, there's a dimensional jump, and the rules change. When you go from 10 to 25, 25 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 250, 250 to 500. So it's roughly doubling. Every time you double, all the rules change. And if
Mark, that's why I said there's a difference between, to be general, a CPA and a CFO, or a manager and a leader. When companies are small and growing rapidly, they're kind of out of control. If they're growing, it's usually because they've got entrepreneurial leaders, not managers. When companies get to a certain scale, they need systems. So whether it's when you go public, it might be one trigger point. The critical mass of the company starts going from being driven by leaders who are unbound by bureaucracy and rules, and you tend to recruit managers. And my observation in bigger companies that I've been involved with is, what ends up happening is there's very few real leaders, and you end up with a lot of managers. So when they move around positions, they see their job as managing, to a certain extent, the status quo within the rules that have been defined to create a safer business environment. And then they get stuck. And, when you're growing a business, it's hard to recognize how you grow the people to still have that flexibility that they had when they were part of a rapidly growing organization to one that needs to stabilize and produce profit, not just revenue, as an example. So there are kind of differences, but you can keep the same people, but then you've got to keep their leadership skills sharp so that they don't turn into managers.
So, Peter, you made a great statement here that how do you change that mindset from growing revenue to focusing profit?
Well, if you're private, it's a lot easier, right? Because whose business, whose company is it? Who's making the rules? Who's deciding the content of leaders versus management? But there's the world is littered with companies that grow fast, produce no profit, right? You could look at Amazon as one of those, as you are, as the behemoth. It's whoever's in control. It's harder when it becomes shareholders of a public company, right? Because then you can't necessarily do what you need to do, because it depends whether you're being rewarded for revenue or for profit. And there's a balance between those two things. And the more profit you want to produce, the more system-driven you have to be, and the less flexible the company becomes, and the more managers you need rather than leaders that take risk.
See, it's interesting.
Thank you. You just whatever time I've spent with Mark over the last 10 years, you just paid for it right there. It's the biggest issue that I have in what I'm doing now with independent entrepreneurs who are franchised, who have independent contractors working for them. And if the industry focuses, for some reason, is always on the volume or the top-line revenue, which is important. But at the end of the day, I've seen, in my career, I've seen a number of companies that have been very efficient in pushing revenue to the top and going out of business.
Absolutely. It doesn't pay the bills, right?
Right, right.
And in the auto industry, I'll give you an example of Porsche as a company that at one point could nearly buy out Volkswagen, one of the biggest car companies in the world, because their profit was great, their revenue, their top line was not. But they were the most valuable car company on the planet. And so, similarly to the real estate industry, the automotive industry is independent franchisees. And, often the mothership, the brand, the original equipment manufacturers focused on growth and revenue and judged by it, when in fact they can go bust going that way, like General Motors has done on occasions and Chrysler. So, but it's the same in technology too. There are those that have, 50% margins and less revenue growth, and there are those that have 40% revenue growth and 10% margins. Which one do you want to be part of?
So, Tom, I think the answer, Tom, is it's the business X-ray for what you're doing, because it shows the independent person how much potential they have. Like somebody has, it's on the screen now, like somebody has a human being, somebody running a company, it's like they're their own employee so often, like they're managing, recruiting, they're selling, they're doing all of these things, and so it's really hard for them to be a leader, because if they're not a manager, they're going out of business. If they're not a leader, they're going out of. If they're not a manager today, they're going out of business tomorrow. If they're not a leader, well, they'll always go ahead and be an employee. They'll never be an entrepreneur. So trying to straddle between leadership and management and actually doing it. So the X-ray, what the X-ray shows is it shows something visually that you have a lot of pent-up potential that's not being fully tapped. That excites people. They're like, I knew. So in this example, 1.6 million over the last, 3 years, or you're losing $10,000 a week because you're bleeding this. Well, they don't have all the analytics. They don't have all of the other stuff, so they don't know. Where the big companies, they're measuring every pipeline that they possibly can, so they know where their bleeding is. But the small company, the entrepreneur, the salesperson, the independent person, they don't know that. So when they see that, they're like, $10,000 a week. Then when you show them how much they're worth in this situation, $1,087 an hour, they're like, wow. So we've had so many conversations, Tom, over the years with where a franchise will continue to come up with new systems and tools all the time, but the franchisees, they don't use them. But there's this, it's not effective for anybody, but it's the way it's done. Well, here, why are you losing $10,000 a week? It's because you have yellow in your X-ray, and yellow means you have no systems, or you're not using the systems that are in place. And so if a franchisor were to go ahead and have all their franchisees go through this simple business X-ray, it's $285. It's like it's so inexpensive. We had a guy a few years ago that I had the privilege of doing the review with him, and at the end of the review, he's like, Mark, I am so ticked off. And I'm like, whoa, what's going on? He's like, I wish I'd have known you guys a year ago. He's like, I paid an outside consulting firm over $40,000 to come in and analyze my business. He said, Mark, I learned more in the $285 X-ray than I did in the $40,000. And so it reveals truth to people to say, here are the gaps. And having another system, having more technology, going to seminars and workshops and all of that, if you don't understand contextually where your leaks are, where your gaps are, you're not going to fix it. You're going to go from one thing to another thing to another thing to another thing. It's just not going to work. Reminds me, Tom, of where you... Go ahead.
I was just going to give you an example of, the genius of Wayne Huizinga, right, who took mom-and-pop garbage and turned it into waste management, then took mom-and-pop video rentals and turned it into Blockbuster, and then did the same in the auto industry with AutoNation, all of which became the biggest in the world. And he really just added up the top line revenue, put it all under one umbrella, and then brought systems and efficiency in to turn that revenue that wasn't very profitable, didn't have much of a margin in each of those different industries, into bottom line profitability. And that's the kind of, when you look at a life cycle of a growing business, they go through this evolution where they generate revenue very inefficiently, but they're growing like crazy. And then you have to bring in systems to turn that revenue into profit. And the same thing applies at any scale of business at some point. So if you have revenue, then you've got to look at your organization and say, what margin, what profit do I want from that? If you don't have enough revenue and you need to grow more, whether you acquire it or develop it yourself, you need people with different skills, or you need people that can be flexible enough to train or recognize the skills that are needed at that moment in time for the business. But otherwise, it's kind of a simple process, depending on whether you do or don't have revenue, or you do or don't have profit margin.
See, and I'll never forget when Tom shared the story about the Swiss watch, and Timex just crushing them. And so the disruptors, the big companies, the Goliath, and there's another great book by Malcolm Gladwell. All of his books are amazing. But David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell, great book, and how the disadvantages of being a Goliath, being a giant, like they're a lot more vulnerable than what they or anybody around them thinks they are. Because in big, there's tremendous weaknesses in being large.
Yeah, give you another quote. It's not the big that eat the small, it's the nimble that eat the slow.
We got to put that in here. Tom and Peter, thanks so much for the extra time today. Anything else, Tom, Peter, either of you have?
No, that's it. It's been great.
Okay. I'm going to stick around. Yeah, go ahead.
Do we have real estate people on this call?
David was on at the beginning. He's not. He took off. Is there anyone else? Is there anyone else that's joined us in real estate? Paul is in the mortgage industry.
The only reason I ask him, because we've been talking the last few minutes about profit. From my perspective in the years I've been there, the one factor to really look at in a real estate organization, when we look at, we have revenue, and then we have cost of sale, and then we have what we call retained company dollar, which is, okay, now the revenue comes in, I pay my agents their portion of it, and so whatever's left based on the commission structure is what I have left to pay my bills. And what most companies don't do is focus on the retained company dollar. If I know what percent I need to have to make profit and pay the bills, and I can maintain my commission structures to that retained company dollar, all of a sudden it becomes pretty easy to run a profitable real estate operation.
Right. Well, you see that in the mortgage industry too. Like back when I got into the mortgage industry, there it was a Wild West. Like no regulation, just jump in, you just start doing it. Now there's so much government oversight and everything else, it becomes hard to be nimble. Peter, if you could email me that quote, I love that quote. And so,
yeah, I'd like to have it too.
So there's in being able, things are shifting and moving so fast in the marketplace. It's just insane. Teresa, Rosanna, Paul, any of you have any questions or thoughts for Tom or Peter today before we finish up?
I think I would like to have a question that presented in the next week or so on how to rope in the millennials. And I think that one of the questions that I would ask Tom would be his story on the railway cars, if it has not been shared.
Oh, my gracious.
On Leverage. And that maybe if we could get the millennials to be using Leverage in a more important way, we might actually help the generation that's coming up.
What was the story?
On the railroad cars when you were in high school or college, and you went ahead and cleaned out more cars than you were supposed to.
Oh, God. Talk about, I guess it was a lesson.
And so we'll do that. Definitely we want to put that on the schedule for next week or the following week when we do the DNA for life. Also, Nicole wasn't able to be on today, but definitely want to talk to you, both of you guys. So Tanglewood, they build $1 million conservatories all over the world. They have a database, a list that's just unbelievable. But working with very affluent and influential people is really tricky. Like, it's like nitroglycerin. And so very volatile. And so we wanted to bring the mastermind together and come up with how do they, so there's a nonprofit Alan and Nancy started, Nicole's heading that up, Untangled Minds. And how do Alan and Nancy and Nicole and the team, how do they approach their very, 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 very wealthy network to raise funds? So that's another topic we'll be talking about, in a future week. Paul, is there any questions or thoughts that you have?
No, not right now.
Can you share about your passions for, I don't know, what it's called, mental health or any of that kind of stuff?
Can I share on mental health?
Yeah, your passions on mental health to help people overcome hurting or to heal from very traumatic situations.
Well, it's kind of what used to be an art is now a science. So a big cause of mine personally is pain, pain management, and the connection between the mind, brain, and body. And the kind of fascinating thing about it is more and more research is done. There is, it's incredibly misunderstood, but your brain is a pretty amazing organ. And what is really interesting about one's brain is that your brain cannot distinguish between physical pain and traumatic pain. Traumatic pain is another word for would be emotional pain. And the ability for your brain to recognize them is impossible. And so this kind of body of medicine that I've been involved in on an advisory committee, John Strax is the gentleman, Dr. Strax in Chicago, who heads this up. It deals with chronic pain, and a lot of people end up in debilitating pain, and they're constantly looking for physical causes for it. Your brain's pretty clever because it creates physical pain where somebody would expect it. So if you're a bowler, for example, you like to bowl, and you develop backache, you're logically thinking, oh, I threw the ball wrong, I'm using too heavy of a ball, and the issue could be just normal stress and anxiety, and you have pain. And so the whole concept behind it is when you start understanding the emotional trauma, you don't need to have medication. You don't need to have anything more than an understanding of what it is, where it's coming from, acknowledge it, and your brain has an incredible capacity to heal itself. It's elastic, so it can unlearn pain, and you don't have to be in chronic pain. You don't have to take opiates. You don't have to do an awful lot of things that people do. It doesn't have to be debilitating. You just need to understand it and find help through these mind-body. There's apps, there's books. Dr. John Sarno, great book on understanding that mind-body connection. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. It's all rooted in science. So it's not let's do some voodoo needle, in acupuncture, and it's nothing like that at all. It is the science part is that there's no correlation between images of your body, your spine, backaches, got a ruptured disc. Zero correlation between that and the pain you're experiencing. You can they actually did a test with 100 people. They brought in some of the top radiologists in the world to view 100 images, MRIs and X-rays. They were 50-50 at guessing who would be experiencing pain, and that's a horrible diagnosis when your best radiologists in the world get it right 50% of the time. So the message for everybody is that you can have an MRI, and your MRI could say, oh my God, you've got 15 holes in your spine, and that does not necessarily mean that's why you're feeling pain. So that's my passion for the day, for the week, for the year.
So there's a book out there. I was trying to find it because there's an awesome quote in it. It's "You are the placebo," and so the mind is it's like every medication, every medicine that comes out competes against the brain. It competes against the placebo. But they only can do it short term. They can't do it over, 30 years. And so they say, okay, this one, well, maybe a one in the short term, but not the long term. And so Paul's, kind of, really passionate about the mortgage industry, but he's also passionate about that. I don't know which I would recommend for him to take. I personally like the pain stuff because, I don't take, aspirin. If I have a headache, there's a reason for it. Go through the pain and figure it out. And so it's really cool to have Paul on. Anyone else have anything else before we wrap it up today? Okay.
Well, I just had a quick question, just maybe to pick everybody's brain. So I have a chance to connect with a local group that works with a lot of professionals and helps mentor business owners, and they're looking for topics to really draw on a lot of people, and was wondering if there's any topics that you think apply to all business owners that would be a really hot topic in today's marketplace.
Cool. Tom, Peter, any hot topics that you guys can think of?
Can you repeat the question again? I'm not
sure.
sure I understood what you were saying.
So she's got an opportunity to speak or have speakers come in for SCORE, S-C-O-R-E, the retirees things for, I think it's government type of thing. And so they're looking for topics that would draw in business owners, all types of business owners at all different levels. And so do you have any suggestions on topics that would tend to draw in business owners, leaders, business people to an event?
Well, I think we just go through the fundamentals: profit, hiring good people, hiring good managers, managing good people. Go through those kinds of topics. I would think that would
cool.
Be some good ones to start with.
Absolutely. Peter?
What's the event?
It's SCORE. So they're the, retirees, I think worldwide, nationwide at least, and they're retirees in business that volunteer to do consulting for, local businesses. So they're like SCORE chapters all over the country. And so Teresa's connected into the one who heads up the speakers, and so they're looking for topics that would attract, business owners. What's it take to get business owners to be drawn in?
I don't know. I mean, I'd probably go along the lines of taking the stress out of running your own business.
Cool.
Because that kind of ties into the basics that Tom just mentioned.
Right.
It's stressful.
Cool. Anyone else?
I like that. Thank you.
Anyone else have any ideas for Teresa on topics?